I was basically in love with my therapist. Now, it's not exactly what you think. This was back in 2017. Now, setting the scene, my OCD was as bad as it had ever been. I was doing an outpatient program at McLean Hospital for about a month. I was waiting to get into the inpatient treatment center where I would stay in the hospital overnight. When I finally did get into the treatment center, I was there for about a month. And during this time, I found out that I didn't actually have bipolar, but I had OCD. I thought I had bipolar for about a year. I was seeing this therapist at the time, and I was telling her that I was having these really drastic up and downs. I said something like, if my baseline's here, I'm like, I'm up here, and then something happens and I'm boom, down here depressed for weeks, and then, up again. And it's like, it felt so erratic. I was like, I don't know how to self-regulate. I am really impulsive. I think I told her that I struggled falling asleep when I was younger because I could never get to bed. And it wasn't until I started listening to TV going to bed and following along the script that I finally was able to fall asleep. I didn't have insomnia, but I did not sleep when I was younger. And I was basically telling her that I'd never felt steady a day in my life, that I had these high highs and then these extreme low lows, and I just felt so disoriented. And she was like, well, do you think that you might have bipolar? I was like, well, now that you've said it. And I was like, a therapist wouldn't say that to me unless I probably had bipolar disorder, so I obviously have it. Then when they diagnosed me with OCD, I was like, you're joking. I was like, no way. Am I in a mental hospital for obsessive compulsive disorder? Because in my head, I only knew the stereotype. I had no idea that OCD was ranked in the top 10 most debilitating disorders, mental or physical, in the world. I was like, I am not being taken down right now by a cleaning disorder. But she was. The only thing I had heard about OCD at this point was being super organized, having a spotless room, a color-coded closet. I was like, my room looks like a bomb went off in it. Or being super type A, having good grades, always being on time, very punctual. And I'm 100% type B. I was massively struggling in school because of my OCD and my ADHD and my processing disorder. And in fairness, I actually was very punctual, but it's actually a common symptom for those who have OCD to be late and to be tardy because our compulsions take up so much time. Our rituals are so time consuming that they can consistently make people with OCD late. When I got diagnosed with OCD, I also started learning about exposure and response prevention therapy. Terrifying. But luckily I had about a month in the outpatient unit to wrap my brain around doing it. By the time I entered into the inpatient unit, I felt ready to go. Which, by the way, entering the overnight program was an exposure in itself because I had emotionally contaminated that building on campus. If you don't have OCD or are unfamiliar with what emotional contamination is, it's basically where your brain starts telling you that certain people, objects, places, or even thoughts are somehow bad, tainted, contaminated. Or if you come in contact with them or even think about them, it can feel then you're contaminated too. I'm not talking about germs. I'm talking about emotional germs. If that makes sense. Something like bad vibes, bad energy, just rubbing off on you and tainting you. For example, if something bad happened while wearing a certain top, I would either throw the top away or I'd have to wash it a certain amount of times before I could wear it again. Or if I bumped into somebody that I deemed emotionally contaminated, I would purposely bump into somebody else to remove that from my body and put it onto somebody else's that probably wouldn't be affected by it. Because if I didn't, then I'd have these I call them phantom tingles, and they don't go away. And if I touched it, then my hand would be phantom tingly too, and I'd have to wash my hands, I'd have to wash my body, I'd have to take a shower, it'd just be a whole ordeal. But sometimes for me, even just having a weird feeling while looking at a specific building or place, or just being oh, that's a little dark and kind of scary, that was enough to emotionally contaminate something for me. My world is pretty small. Pretty small. And then you avoid all of these people, all of these places, all of these things, all of these thoughts, even though logically they're safe. And then, avoiding things, fixing things, cleaning yourself, it just reinforces that behavior and that belief that those things are contaminated and they are bad. And that's where kind of exposure therapy comes into play. But anyway, I was ready to go. I was bring on the exposure therapy. I was if this doesn't work, I can be done. I am rock bottom right now. I was I'm going to give this my absolute all. And I did. But anyway, within the first 2 days of being in the mental hospital and around people like me, I felt normal for the first time in my entire life. Do you know how humbling it is to feel normal for the first time in your entire life when you're in a mental hospital? Probably not, because I'd say it's pretty niche. But I just admired and respected these people that were going through the same struggles that I was also going through. So I felt so seen and I felt so understood. I had a personal therapist that I saw, I think, about every day. I don't really remember because it was 8 years ago. But if you couldn't go to your main therapist, there were a bunch of other therapists that you could go to. I can't remember if they were student therapists or if they had just graduated and became certified as therapists. But anyway, they were just throughout the building. They were basically there just to help us with whatever we needed. Whether we needed to go to the bathroom, they would give us a key. If we needed help going through an exposure, some of them taught the lessons, or just they were there to check in. One day we were all sitting in the common area, and one of these student therapists / just recently licensed therapists was telling a ghost story. A huge part of my OCD is surrounded by scrupulosity, and a huge part of that includes a bunch of intrusive thoughts, images, and compulsions surrounding like moral and religious topics. So when he started telling the story, I was like, you're joking. I was like, bye, peace out, I'm going to my room, how dare you, you absolute loser. The next day I couldn't stop feeling guilty because I was like, that would have been such a good opportunity for an exposure. And instead of staying, I just took myself out of the situation and left. I was talking to my therapist about it, and he was like, well, why don't you go back to him and ask him to tell you the story? And I was like, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Like, I'll go do that. So I went to go find him, and mind you, I had already emotionally contaminated him because he had told the ghost story. But I went up to him anyway, and I asked if he would be so kind to tell me the ghost story again. He was so nice. He was like, of course, let's do it. We sat on the kitchen counters and we started talking, and he started telling me the ghost story. Now, I don't remember the story, but I do remember thinking that it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I also remember it not scarring me as much as I thought it was going to scar me. And then I was like, wow, I'm like really proud of myself. Like, look at me, I just listened to a ghost story. I just asked somebody to tell me one. That was like a really big moment for me, especially at this time. And after the story, we just started having like a regular conversation, and we vibed. I think his name was Justin. I know it starts with a J. I'm not really sure. You can probably check my journals from back in the day. It would definitely be in there, like with little hearts next to his name. No, I'm kidding, but like, he was a skater boy. I said, see you later, boy. Just kidding. This is obviously my mental health hospital romance. He wore a backwards cap. He was like my height. He was like super into heavy metal. And now I went through a heavy metal phase back in the day, and guess who brought it back? I did. When I crush on somebody, I crush pretty hard. It's almost like it's obsessively. Now, honestly, I handle it pretty well. But back in the day at 19 years old, there were no checks and balances. So yeah, like 0 to in love really quick. I basically walked away from that conversation with a new love. I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was getting married so soon. Another huge reason why I started to like him is because I emotionally contaminated him. And I was like, what an amazing exposure this would be if we started dating. Mind you, once again, I am in a mental hospital. I am really struggling right now. There is a lot going on up here, okay? Like, I'm fine now. I don't even meet any requirements for OCD, but back in the day, we were meeting those requirements hard. He obviously had no idea that I felt this way. He probably actually did, because when I like somebody, I'm about as subtle as like a nuclear weapon, and that's to this day. So I'm actually pretty sure that I wasn't doing a good job of like keeping that under wraps. But as far as I was concerned, I was super chill. That was until my last day at the OCDI. That was the treatment center. That was what it was called in McLean Hospital. I wrote him this really nice and genuine note because he actually he helped me so much. He went through that exposure moment with me, which was a really, really, really big deal to me at the time. And he had done it with like such kindness and acceptance. And I just valued him so much. But at the end of that note, I told him that I liked him and that I had feelings for him. I gave him my Facebook, my number, and probably my Instagram. I don't really remember. And I told him that if he ever felt comfortable, he should send me a message. Hit me up. Unfortunately, he never did. Beats me. Pretty sure it would have been illegal, and also I know he did not have any romantic interest in me whatsoever. I'm also 99.9% sure that man told my main therapist what I did. Snake. Because our first session after the hospital, he was like, anything else? Anything else you want to tell me? And I was like, no, Jake. How about you mind your own business? You're married with kids, okay? I'm like, so what if a girl puts herself out there? But no, like looking back, it's really funny. It's like hilarious. I hope I didn't make him feel uncomfortable. I probably did, but thank goodness I waited till like the last day I was there. But no, he like made my time there so much more enjoyable. That man was like an absolute gem. Everybody loved him. He was such a sweetheart, and he was such an incredible source of support, not just for me, but for everybody. And to this day, he has a very, very, very non-romantic space in my heart. Because I will say, after I stopped the medication that I was on, those feelings did subside. I was like, oh, I think I was trying to feel something there. At the time, I was medicated up. Like, that's how intense my symptoms were. I was incapable of doing anything normal. So I was heavily medicated. So when I came off of the medication without telling the doctor, which don't do, yeah, I started crashing and burning a little bit. And obviously one of those things that I started figuring out was that I wasn't in love. Crazy. But I would say that's like the juiciest bad girl off limits thing that like my OCD would have caused me to do. I definitely don't recommend liking a therapist when you're in a mental hospital, because it's very much like a one-sided Romeo and Juliet. I'd love to say I've had normal romances since then, but maybe one day. Anyway, gotta love the men you can't have, right? But if you or somebody that you know is struggling with OCD, navigating these different phases of your life, go to NOCD.com. All of their therapists are licensed in exposure and response prevention therapy and specialize in OCD treatment. I hope you have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this funny, juicy story of what my OCD has just made me do. Thank you for watching!